there's a lot that people talk about when it comes to marriage, like communication. And I think self-awareness comes before the communication. But there's one thing, the secret of allowing, that for some reason just isn't spoken enough about. And that's what we're discussing on today's episode. Hey there, I'm Esty Rappaport, your host of the Life Fix University podcast. And I am here together with the authors of the Gogiver Marriage, a couple who've been married for over 25 years, John and Anna Mann. They've also authored, John actually, they authored the other Gogiver books. So there's a whole bunch of them. The Gogiver Selling, just the Gogiver and the Gogiver Seller, the Gogiver Leader, which you can go and check out. But I'm excited to hear about the Gogiver Marriage and the secret of allowing. Thank you so much, John and Anna, for being here. You want to start by telling us how you guys met?
Yeah. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. So we met in our 20s, or let me say this, our eyes met in our 20s. We were literally at a party where, just like Tony and Maria in the West Side Story, we saw each other across the room. And I thought, she is cute as a button. And she thought, whatever she thought, she'd have to tell you. And we didn't actually meet. I didn't even know her name. In fact, I didn't know her name until almost 20 years later, when we crossed paths again. And we've been through 20 years of life and difficulties and all kinds of things at that time. And so finally, we had to cross paths in business. We were business colleagues, and we ended up being business colleagues in a couple of different business ventures. And we were both coming out of unhappy marriages, and we both became single people. And much to our surprise, suddenly became romantic. And look at this. Now we've been together for 25 years and we're married, and we even wrote a book about marriage. So that's, you never know what'll happen is the moral of the story.
Yeah. What's that story from your perspective, Anna?
Totally different, probably.
Yeah, I would say it was the same, except that I was really, really drawn to him at the first meeting. But I was with somebody else, and I am committed. Like, I would never even flirt if I was out with somebody else, So it just, the opportunity went by. But 20 years later, it was very different. We became really fast friends very quickly. John is just, he's just a really fascinating, interesting person, and has a lot of different facets to who he is. And we both have been writers and have written and published before. So we had a really strong interest right from the get-go in writing. So it drew us together.
So when you met right away, you knew that you would write a book together. We
were two ships passing in the night, but then we became two ships crashing in the middle of the ocean.
Romantic as can be still. So before we get into the Gogiver Marriage, you want to back up and tell us what that Gogiver is?
Sure. And you asked a moment ago, do we know we wanted to write a book from the first moment we met? Not exactly, but it's been in our minds for a long time. The Gogiver is a little book, looks a lot like this book, but it's got a red cover. And I wrote it with a friend, Bob Berg. The first draft came off my desktop printer in 2005. It was finally published in 2008. So this is going back a ways. And it's a parable. It's a book called The Gogiver, a little story about a powerful business idea. So even though it's a business book, it's really kind of a life book. It's based on this idea of living with generosity. The idea of it is, when you take your focus off yourself and put it on other people and looking out for their interests rather than just looking out for your own, it's not only a nice or noble, an altruistic way to live, it's pragmatic. You actually do better in the world. You create a better reputation. People feel better about you. You end up, karma happens. What goes around comes around. And you end up actually thriving and flourishing when you are a person who lives with a spirit of generosity. And Anna, I've published over 30 books, and Anna has been the first reader for all of them. She reads the book years before anybody else, reads the published version. And she pulled up this printed copy out of my printer and read it and said, wow, this is a really great book. And it would be a great book on marriage. It took us over a decade to get to that point. where we actually did that book on marriage. There have been other Gogiver books, a Gogiver book on leadership, a Gogiver book on influence, a Gogiver book on sales. The original Gogiver has sold over 1 million copies. So it's been a long journey for the Gogiver books. We finally got to do our book about marriage. And this is Anna's passion. This is like her life mission. She's a family therapist and a marriage coach. And I think she wanted to write this book for years before she even knew she wanted to write this book. So over to you, sweetheart.
It is true, actually. I love unwinding the issues with couples because we all bring this very rich childhood history with us into our relationships as adults. And, if depending on how you were treated as a child and the things that you went through, you're carrying some baggage. I like to say that we all arrive at marriage with many suitcases. And as soon as the honeymoon's over, they start unpacking. And it can be things like processing differences, depression. Somebody had an abusive parent and they haven't really gotten over that. Whatever the issues are, they magically show up. And so, it's really one of those situations where if you try to enter an intimate relationship with somebody else before you've become whole with yourself, then all your relationships will reflect that. And, your unfinished healing, if you will.
Yeah. How is that for you and John, right? How you got married later and already been in relationships and done work on you. How do you see a difference into how much baggage you brought into your marriage then?
I think actually we were both had hung out for a really long time, staying committed to marriages that weren't shifting, changing, growing, and didn't have the opportunity for each person to complete a bunch of healing that was needed. And when you're very young, you often enter into marriages, and we're both very committed. So, we entered into marriages thinking that, this was a lifelong commitment. And at the same time, when you're young, you kind of don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you can really enter into something that, you discover later on that this person is actually suffering from a quiet depression that they've never managed and never done anything about. Or you can, have multiple traumas happen in your life, like children with special needs and extreme accidents or injury and other things that suddenly put the whole marriage in a different scope. So I think that we spent a long time courting. We spent 10 years courting. And by that, I mean, we didn't get married for 10 years after we met. And we had a lot of time to really discover what it was about each other and how compatible we were or weren't. So I felt really confident. By the time we married, believe it or not, our 5 kids were telling us, "You guys need to get married. You're so in love. Like, cut it out. Just do it." So it was pretty, and we did in fact wait for the kids, because one of the reasons that we courted for so long was that we had 5 teenagers at the time that we first were falling in love. And, you don't merge, joined households are very, very difficult to manage to begin with. But when you have 5 teenagers, look out.
Yeah.
I want to just pop in there and say, I mentioned that when you're young, you don't know what you're getting into. I think also when you're young, often, at least this was true for me, that when I was young, I really didn't have a good sense of who I was in the world. I mean, I had so much self-unpacking to do. And I think that was a big factor in all my youth, both in my relationships and professionally as well. By the time Anna and I came back together after those 20 years, after the party, we'd done a lot of self-exploration. I think we both knew a lot more about ourselves. Even so, when I first fell in love with Anna, I wanted to get married right now. And I knew that if I didn't get married right now, I would die. It was like I needed oxygen. She was the oxygen. And she said, no, she said, I think this is too fast. This is too soon, too early. And I really, really didn't like hearing that. And she was really right.
It's
I
like
needed
now,
that time.
20 years later, you could say,
yeah,
right. But then it's like, you're just mad.
By the time we finally did get married, in fact, we were so solid in our relationship. We knew each other and we knew ourselves so well. We were so solid in our relationship that it was like, roots of an oak tree that go down, 50 feet into the earth. But I think that she was right, that we had I had some self-discovery to do first.
Yeah, we each have to like work on ourselves, and then we could come together to actually work on the marriage. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so back to our Gogiver book. Even the original book, what was your idea for the Gogiver book and the whole structure and message for it in general?
So the idea of the original Gogiver book, as I said, it's a parable. And the idea of it was that people really learn best through stories. This has been true forever.
Added a whole bunch of them in this one.
Yeah, for thousands of years, we've known this. People learn well through stories. And so the idea of the Gogiver was to teach a couple of basic principles. In the book, they're called the 5 laws of stratospheric success. And we teach those principles through a story that doesn't feel like you're being taught a story. It feels like you're reading something that's interesting. It's a story. You care about these characters. And all of the Gogiver books kind of followed that path. For the Gogiver marriage, we did something a little different. We added something. It's a little story about the 5 secrets to lasting love. That's the subtitle of the book. We wanted to teach these 5 secrets through a story, which we do. The first half of the book is called The Parable. And it's another story about a young couple, Tom and Tess, who had a child with special needs and have been really struggling for the past 5-6 years and are at a crossroads in their life. And they meet some engaging characters who teach them things. That's the story part. And then the second half is called The Practice. And Anna really wrote that part. And that's where she unpacks all the ideas in the story and kind of lays them out for here's how they actually work. Here's how you can apply them in your life. It's like a how-to guide for the principles that you sort of got by osmosis in the story.
Yeah. And what we do at Life Peaks University, which is based on the Feuerstein method, is all like done through non-typical things. Is like Professor Feuerstein always uses like stories or even like animals and like exaggerated situations that don't happen in real life, so that way people could actually take it, because it's so much easier that way.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, hey, that's how Sesame Street works, right? I mean,
right.
It's very fundamental. That's
great. Stories are really powerful. And also one of our goals with the back of the book, because, you can write about something psychologically and, it's kind of dry and academic. We really laid out the structure of the back of the book to really address what's the developmental underpinning of this secret? Why is it important? Why was it something you needed as a child and you still need it now? And then second, we went into, what happens when people are kind of missing that element. So there's client stories in the middle that tell the stories of how couples get off track in this area, and then how applying this secret shifted it and sort of both the positive side and the negative side of what the secret means. Like, every secret has its opposite in terms of behavior. So these are secrets that are really behavioral shifts that you can make in your relationship, and they really significantly change the tone of the relationship.
Yeah. Now, the secret that interests me most is the secret of allow. Do you want to explain to me what that means?
Sure. Yeah, all 5 of the secrets are actually simple things you can practice every day. They're mindset, and they're also a mode of behavior. One of them is called allow. And what allow means,
and it's 3. It's the third secret.
Yeah. It's the third secret. Yeah. And the first 2 are more direct and immediate. And allow is a little more subtle. And I'm not surprised it caught your interest, Esty, because it's a little more like, okay, what does this mean? Allow is something that often emerges only after you've been together for a while. It is the part in the traditional marriage vows where they say, for better or for worse, in sickness or in health, for richer or for poor. This is the worst part. This is the sickness part. This is the thing that comes out when times are difficult, when we're under stress. Let's say when one partner is sick or has an issue with their family, their parents, or they have a professional catastrophe, or they have an accident, or whatever. They're going through something difficult. Allow means give your partner the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they're cranky or irritated one day. Assume that something's bothering them and they're not just being nasty to you. Give them the benefit of the doubt, give them space, give them extra support, give them extra love, give them extra time if that's what they need. Allow means sometimes you need to pick up more slack in the relationship around the house than seems fair. I like to say marriage is not fair. It's not. It's not supposed to be. That's not how it's set up. Marriage isn't a situation where it's designed to be neat and 50-50. So we each get our own set of marbles in there. And at the end of the day, we each have the same number of marbles. Marriage is a situation where you kind of give your all and the other person does too. And as a result, we create a rising tide that raises both ships, not just one or the other. So allow is where you drop the scorecard and stop keeping track of who's ahead or behind, who's right or who's wrong, who's being fair or who's not, who's in a better mood or who is not. And you just are there for your partner. It's just being there and accepting them the way they are, as they are right now.
Yeah. Could you give us some examples if you want to get better at being allowed? Like, what could we start doing?
Well, I'll give you an example that happens frequently to young couples. And it's the example of having a miscarriage. You know, a couple gets together, they're very excited to get pregnant, and they get pregnant. Maybe they've even told their parents and the immediate family. Maybe they've even told a couple friends. And then, boom, 8 weeks in or so, they have a miscarriage. We've seen a lot of couples that I've coached or that we've worked with together that, you know, he's over it 8 weeks later. It was a sad thing. It happened, but it didn't happen to him. It happened to his spouse. And yes, it happened to the relationship, but he wants to move on. He wants to get busy trying again.
Yeah.
And she might be in a state of grief that's really kind of been all consuming. And she's feeling like her body has failed her. She has failed the relationship. She feels like maybe something's wrong with her. She's having what would be considered post hormonal shifts. She may be depressed and she's not ready to let go yet. And so allow would be an opportunity for the husband in that situation to recognize that they're grieving at different paces.
Yes.
And that she's not ready to let go. She's not ready to start trying again. She needs some space. She needs some love. She needs some support. And just to be okay with that, to not be in some place where you're pressuring her to get over it. We've actually seen couples where the husband would be like practically standing there with his hands on his hips saying, I know it was awful, but it's over. It's gone. Let's move on. And, she's not there. So it's extending that layer of compassion that you give to your partner simply because you recognize that you're not in the same place and that what she needs right now is your compassion, your love, and your support. So that's one example. Another I'll use comes directly from our marriage. Just before we got married, maybe 2 years before we got married, I took a dive down a set of stairs and I fractured my knee in over 20 places. And when you break your knee, they don't cast it because it's a joint. So you literally have to just sit still and keep your knees straight for a very long time. I couldn't get a glass of water across the room. I couldn't easily take a shower. I couldn't do anything. My foot would swell up and go blue. And, so I ended up being on crutches for a year and a half. Yeah, that's how long it took to heal. And it was complicated. I had to have surgery. I mean, there were things that went on. So for that entire time, we're real foodies. I'm always cooking. I love to cook. And so for that entire time, John was literally in charge of cooking, cleaning up. I mean, I could sit on a stool. Yeah. I could sit on a stool for a short period of time, but, I wasn't able to shop until way late in that year where I could literally ride a scooter. I mean, it was ridiculous. And that kind of stuff happens in marriages. You can have, we both have children with special needs. When you have a child with special needs, your whole world stops and you have to cope right then and there. You suddenly have a neurologist or some other physicians in your life. You have developmental specialists in your life, and suddenly your entire life. I had to quit my job as a professor. I had to leave all my academic and other job commitments because my child couldn't be in daycare. So, those are the moments when you need to be able to allow for the fact that life has taken a right turn and you're no longer on the same trajectory. You're on a different path now, and you better adapt, and you better be compassionate with each other because you're both in it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, all the examples you gave were like big life examples, miscarriage, breaking your fracture, not something that happens every day. How does allow play into like a day that was just like a bad day at work, or is it not so much?
Give you a great example. So you get up in the morning.
Yep. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. We get up in the morning and, we both have busy days, right? So I'm making breakfast or you're making breakfast. We're going about our stuff. And you are being unusually snippy with me. I feel like you're biting my head off. And I start this whole dialogue on my head. It's like, why are you being this way? And I start having like an internal conversation with you where I'm asking you, what is wrong with you? What is wrong? And I'm also being defensive. It's like the moment you react to anything defensively, it has the immediate and automatic effect of separating the two of you. So the union of the two of you, which we call the us, this little organism that is the combination of the two of us, this marriage, which we represent as a tree, is cut off. You're starving it because it's now suddenly you and me, two separate entities. So I'm feeling defensive and it's like, what's wrong with you? Why are you bitching at me? I didn't do anything wrong. And then about 45 minutes into the kitchen situation, you say, I just did not sleep at all well last night. What do you know? I didn't know that. But you know what? I didn't have to know that. I could have assumed that. And even if I didn't know what the cause was, it's like something's wrong and I need to automatically be kind. I need to give you a little space, give you the benefit of the doubt. Instead of reacting defensively or in a hostile way, it's like, she's hurting this morning. Something's off. Let me make her a cup of tea. Let me just make breakfast. Let me help her do this. Let me do that. These kinds of little scenarios happen all the time, constantly. We're always being given opportunities to either separate and judge the other person or to come together and give the other person space, compassion, and support.
Yeah, totally. Now,
I have a thought to add if that's of interest.
yes.
And it's that when somebody is irritated and they're sort of aiming it at you, your reticular activating system in your brain goes, it's like there's instant flashing lights in your brain. And,
yes.
We work with a lot of clients and we really teach about triggering, because triggering is just what your brain does automatically. The question is, are you going to emotionally respond to it? Are you going to trigger in terms of acting on that trigger? And then all of a sudden you're coming back at your spouse with a really aggressive words or actions, or saying, look, don't talk to me until you decide not to be a bee. It's like you start name calling, and all kinds of things happen when people get into fight or flight reactions, where it's like, okay, you're going to be this way and I'm going to fight you.
And by the way, if you're name calling only in your head, it's just as bad. It just has the same effect as if you say it out loud.
Exactly. And also when I say fight or flight, it's just as easy to walk away angry and to spend the whole day being miffed and thinking, how dare you ruin my morning? And you carry this grudge all day. Your brain is colored, your moods are colored, and you come home from work in a really lousy mood. So now it's taken over your day. And if you allow, then you're allowing for not only individuation. We're separate people. This is your anger, not mine. You're having a bad morning. What can I do to be compassionate about that instead of reacting to it? That's really the secret to allow.
That's what I was about to just clarify, that it's not just giving them the space, not just allowing them of understanding what they're currently going through, but also switching it from being defensive, attacking, being mean, whatever you want, the word you want to use, to really being kind and understanding and compassionate.
Yes. And in doing that, that's brilliant. You're exactly right. And you're switching from the mode of being two to the mode of being one, looking at being part of the other person.
And it demands self-awareness, and it also demands a sense of wholeness in yourself, where you can not only observe your own experience and your own feelings, but have the separation to observe your partner's experience and feelings as separate from yours. So it really does demand that practice of getting clear that this anger that's coming my way is not it's not mine. At the same time, being compassionate toward your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all have those days. So some days it's going to be you and some days it's going to be your partner. So like we said, it goes both ways and it's not a 50-50 situation.
Yes.
I'm curious a little bit, at what point do we say, so cool, it's like time to move on, right? Let's say someone has a miscarriage and it could take them a couple of months, is very understandable to go through all the emotions and process it. But like a year later, if they're still suffering from it, like, what do you do then? How far do we take the allow? Meaning, and it's even better for that person, because if a person is still suffering from something so much later on, they're just like dragging it out and sitting in it instead of being able to move on in their lives. So really, really, really coming from their benefit of wanting to help them get out of that stuck situation.
I think long before a year goes by, I think even 4 or 5 or 6 months, you really want to sit down and have a chat together that's very much about being compassionate but raising the question of, are you okay? And do you need to see a coach or a counselor? Do you need someone to talk to? Do we need to get an outside person to intervene? Do you need to possibly think about a medication for a few months? Do you need to see anything or anybody, that might be helpful to helping that person? Even some nutritional support sometimes is helpful. So it's always important to have the conversation and for the gates of communication to stay open about these things. It's just, you can't force your agenda on them. And, it's important to just remember that.
Right. Because there's no so-called rules about 4 months or 8 weeks, right? Like there are for sure people, right? Like that man that you said earlier who thought 8 weeks was a really long time already. So by having that communication open and coming from that place of a loving perspective, then hopefully, even if it's, let's say 8 weeks instead of that 4 months and just being very, right. Because different people, different situations, everything's going to be different. You'll really be able to figure out what's going on in here.
A more dramatic example, or I'll say it's more dramatic, but it's probably not. It's the same example, really, is when a child dies. Yes. And the statistics are huge that couples do not survive the death of a child. In the story of the Gogiver marriage, there's an example of a couple whose child has died years ago, and there they process grief in such a different way, at such a different pace. And that can easily go for years because it can. Mm-hmm. So I think that sometimes the loss of a parent is a much more common experience. Most people go through the loss of a parent. And that
hopefully you're going through the loss of a parent instead of the opposite way around.
Exactly.
Which is how young your parent is.
Precisely. And that too can be something that people respond to very, very differently in terms of time and expectation. And you have to be generous with the other person. And I think it's important it can be important to have the exploration of, where is this grief at? Where are you with it? And, do you need to go somewhere with it? At the same time, there's another piece to this, which is, and I think you hinted at it, Esty, is it to make a marriage thrive, both individuals need to be also growing and thriving, and to look out for their own growth and their own flourishing. There are so many people who go into a marriage thinking that the marriage will fulfill them, or the marriage will grow them, or that the kids, as a result of the marriage, will fulfill their lives. And there is something very fulfilling about kids. There is something very fulfilling about marriage, but it's not the same thing as your own growth. Nothing takes the place of that. So if the personal growth of either partner starts to stagnate, it can't help but have a starving effect on the marriage itself. We really emphasize the individuals. Anna talks about individuation. We've each got to look out for our own growth as humans. Our partner can't really do that for us. It's ours.
100%. Okay, so before we get to our final question, where can Life Fixers connect with you and learn more about you?
Well, they can connect with us on our website, which is www.gogivermarriage.com. And that has, we have a lot of pre-order specials for anybody that pre-orders the book. There's all kinds of of special master classes that they'll get solo access to, and fireside chat that we're having with our readers about 2 weeks after the book launches. We also do seminars that are really very interesting because they're Zoom driven. They're about 2 to 2.5 hours long. It's a direct training on the 5 secrets and how they interact in a marriage. And then the second half of the training is walking people through, and the 5 secrets part is a real deep dive into the 5 secrets. What do they really mean? And then the second part is all question and answer from the participants. And these are workshops that we do by Zoom for 10 to 35 people. And so you can sign up on our website and get into a workshop. They're very inexpensive, and because we want to make them accessible to people. And gosh,
I'll add to that.
Go ahead.
Add to that on that website, if you hit the contact button and send an email, it goes to Anna and me. It doesn't go to anybody else. We don't have the staff reading our emails. It's like just us. So you can say whatever you want. We won't tell anybody.
We're also both on Instagram. The Gogiver Marriage is on Instagram, but also I'm Anna Gabriel Mann on Instagram, and John is John David Mann on Instagram. And he has other books about writing. So if any of your listeners are interested in learning more about writing, he has some amazing books about writing that are always, there's posts and access to his direct website.
She is my biggest fan. She is my biggest fan. It's true.
Oh, good thing she's here to push it out. Amazing. Those links will be in the show notes. So everyone will be able to go and find them. Now, final question that gets asked to everyone is, how would you describe an extraordinary relationship without using love, trust, and for you, I'm going to put in allow here.
We both get to answer this question?
Both of you.
I would just say us.
Go ahead, you start.
It's an extraordinary relationship. Us. We have an extraordinary relationship. That's my
that's your answer.
Not my final answer, but go ahead, John.
You know, there's a wonderful book by Mark Twain called The Diaries of Adam and Eve. And it tells the whole story of them going through the Garden of Eden and being expelled and going through hell and all this stuff. And in the very beginning, Adam is completely perplexed by this creature that he can't understand called Eve. And at the end of the book, he says, wheresoever she was, there was Eden. And that's how it is for me with Anna. Anna is like home for me. We may not be in this house. We could be anywhere on the planet, but being with her, it's just like being home.
It's so beautiful. So, so beautiful. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much, John and Anna. This was really interesting. And I really hope that after listening to this episode, people will start just allowing more and making that switch in their brain and coming from the right point of view. Thank you.
That's all for this episode of the Life Fix University podcast, but I have a huge favor to ask of you that will not only support the show, but will also help the people you love most. We are striving for 1 million downloads by the end of 2025, and we can't do this without your help. If you love this episode, please share it with 2 of your family and friends so they too can rewire their brains to have an extraordinary marriage. It was awesome spending time with you, and I'll see you on the next episode.